I never imagined my parents would take me to court. Not after everything I had done quietly. Not after years of keeping the peace. Not after sacrificing without being asked. But the summons arrived anyway, thin paper, thick meaning. Petition for transfer of assets. My name was listed as the respondent. My parents were the petitioners. And the reason was written plainly, without shame. To support their other daughter. My sister. I sat at the kitchen table holding the document, rereading the words until they blurred. It wasn't the money that hurt first. It was the certainty with which they believed it belonged to someone else. My savings. Everything I had built alone. I was always the responsible one. The one who worked while studying. The one who saved instead of spending. The one who didn't ask for help because it made things easier for everyone else. My sister, on the other hand, was fragile. At least, that's how she was described. She needs more support. She's going through a phase. You're stronger, you'll manage. And I did. I moved out early, paid my own way, built my savings carefully, not extravagantly. Every dollar had a reason. A future attached to it. I never hid my accounts, but I never imagined I needed to protect them from my own parents. Until they asked a judge to take them. Their argument was simple. Family should help family. I had more than enough. My sister was struggling. They framed it as fairness. They didn't mention that my sister had burned through opportunities faster than she accepted them. Or that I had quietly funded my own education, my own stability, my own safety net. None of that mattered. What mattered was that I had something. And she needed it. I hired a lawyer the same day. Not out of anger. Out of disbelief. He was calm, methodical, almost bored as he flipped through the paperwork. "They're requesting a full transfer?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "For how long?" "They didn't specify." He nodded slowly. "They never do." I laughed once, bitterly. "They think it's temporary." He met my eyes. "People always do." The court date came faster than I expected. My parents sat together, close, united. My sister wasn't there. She never liked uncomfortable situations. They didn't look at me when I entered. Maybe they thought eye contact would weaken their case. The judge listened patiently as my parents' attorney spoke. Words like family obligation and shared responsibility filled the room. Then it was my lawyer's turn. He stood calmly. "Before we discuss finances," he said, "there's a matter of ownership." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Go on." My lawyer reached into his folder and pulled out a document I hadn't seen in years. A deed. Not to property I lived in. But to property I owned. Quietly. Legally. Irrevocably. My parents shifted in their seats. My sister's name wasn't on it. Neither were theirs. I remembered the day clearly now. Years ago, my grandmother had called me over, asked me to sign something. She said it was for security. I hadn't questioned her. She'd always been precise with words. She'd left me something, not money, but control. A safety valve. I hadn't known I'd ever need it. My parents' lawyer objected immediately. "That property isn't relevant," he argued. My lawyer smiled slightly. "It is when the savings you're requesting were legally tied to it." The room went quiet. The judge leaned forward. "Tied how?" she asked. My lawyer didn't rush. "Those savings," he said, "were built using income derived from that property. Which, as the deed shows, belongs solely to my client." My mother's face drained of color. My father whispered something under his breath. The judge studied the document carefully. Then she looked up. "So," she said slowly, "you're asking the court to transfer assets you have no legal claim to." Silence. Not dramatic. Final. My parents looked at me then. Really looked. Not as a daughter. Not as a resource. As a stranger who had just revealed she wasn't as exposed as they thought. The judge closed the file. "We'll take a recess," she said. But the decision was already written. As we stood to leave the courtroom, my mother reached out. "You could have told us," she whispered. I met her eyes. "You could have asked," I replied. When the court resumed, the room felt different. Not tense, exposed. The confidence my parents had walked in with was gone, replaced by something brittle. They sat farther apart now, as if physical distance might soften what had just been revealed. The judge returned, adjusted her glasses, and addressed my parents first. "You're asking this court to override ownership," she said evenly. "On what legal basis?" Their lawyer cleared his throat. "On the basis of familial responsibility and intent." The judge didn't even look down. "Intent does not supersede title." She turned to my lawyer. "Proceed." He stood again, calm as ever. "Your Honor, this request wasn't made in good faith. My client's savings were portrayed as excess when, in fact, they were independently generated and legally protected." My father interrupted then. "She never told us any of this." The judge held up a hand. That's not her obligation. My mother's eyes filled. We were just trying to help our other daughter. I felt the familiar pull of guilt, old, trained, automatic. But it passed. Helping one child by taking from another wasn't help. It was entitlement with better vocabulary. The judge nodded once. This court will not redistribute assets simply because one party regrets not having access to them. She closed the file. Case dismissed. Just like that. No drama, no lectures. Just law doing what emotion could not. Outside the courtroom, my parents stopped me. My father spoke first. You embarrassed us. I laughed softly, not cruelly, but honestly. You brought me to court. My mother reached for my arm. We didn't know you'd prepared like this. Prepared. As if survival were an ambush. I didn't prepare for you, I said. I prepared for life. My sister finally appeared then, breathless, eyes darting. Is it over? She asked. Yes, my lawyer said before I could. Completely. Her face tightened. So that's it? She just keeps everything? I looked at her. I always did. She scoffed. You act like you earned it alone. I did, I replied. She laughed sharply. You think a piece of paper makes you untouchable? No, I said. It makes me protected. My parents said nothing. That silence hurt more than their accusations ever had. In the weeks that followed, the narrative shifted, quietly, but decisively. Extended family reached out with questions. Friends offered support. My parents offered distance. Not anger. Not apology. Distance. They didn't know how to recalibrate a relationship where leverage no longer existed. My sister tried one last time. She showed up at my door unannounced. I just need help, she said, eyes wide, voice trembling. I know, I replied. But not like this. She shook her head. You always get the safety net. I held the doorframe, steady. I built mine. She stared at me, searching for softness. She didn't find it. That night, I reviewed my accounts again. Everything was intact. Not just the money, but the boundaries. I thought of my grandmother then. Of her quiet foresight. Of how she'd known that protection doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from paperwork done in advance. I slept better than I had in years. Because for the first time, my parents weren't watching my stability as a shared resource. They were forced to see it as mine. The silence after the ruling lasted longer than I expected. Not the courtroom kind, the personal kind. Calls stopped. Messages slowed. Family gatherings happened without invitations or explanations. No one argued. No one apologized. They simply adjusted. That adjustment told me everything. When people lose access, they don't always lose interest. But they do lose entitlement. And once entitlement is gone, relationships have to stand on something sturdier. For a while, ours didn't. My sister tried to reframe what happened. To anyone who would listen, she said the court misunderstood the situation. That it was a technicality. That I'd taken things too far. I didn't correct her. Truth doesn't need defending when records exist. What changed was the way people spoke to me, carefully, now. With curiosity instead of assumption. With caution instead of instruction. That wasn't respect born of affection. It was respect born of clarity. A month later, my father asked to meet. Not at home. Not with my mother present. Just the two of us. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, sunlight cutting through the windows. He looked older than I remembered, not weaker, just stripped of certainty. You didn't need to do that, he said finally. I didn't need to be taken to court either, I replied. He nodded once. We thought you'd understand. I did, I said. That's why I protected myself. He stared into his cup. We never meant to hurt you. I know, I said. You just didn't think you would. He looked up. You could still help your sister. I met his eyes calmly. I could. I won't. He didn't argue. That was new. My mother reached out next. Her message was careful, measured. I wish we'd handled things differently. I read it twice before responding. So do I. No accusations. No explanations. Just truth. She replied with a heart emoji. I left it on read. Time did what courtrooms can't. It settled things. My sister downsized. Quietly. Without announcements or photos. The penthouse never came up again. Not as a dream, not as a regret. My parents stopped asking about my finances altogether. They asked about me instead. Where I was traveling. What I was working on. How I was sleeping. Not often, but genuinely. I answered when I wanted to. That was the balance. One afternoon, while organizing old documents, I found the deed again, the same one that had ended everything. I held it for a long moment, thinking of my grandmother. Of how she'd anticipated what I hadn't. Of how protection doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like foresight. Sometimes it looks like trusting someone to need it later. I placed the deed back in the folder and closed it gently. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. Finished being the solution to problems I didn't create. Finished being the backup plan. Finished being responsible at my own expense. My savings were never just money. They were time, choice, freedom. And when my parents tried to give them away, the court didn't just protect my assets. It clarified my place, not as a resource, not as a fallback, but as a person with the right to say no and the preparation to make it stick.